Welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road Podcast. I'm your host, Chris, and joining me for today's show to talk about nightmares is the poster child of nightmares, Mr. JJ from the Southern Demonology podcast. Thanks for joining me today, JJ.
Woohoo! Happy to be here.
Yep, I'm glad to have you back on again. We actually talked about recording this for quite a while now. I know the last time we spoke, it wasn't the Demonology podcast. I think it was when you shared your stories about Patrick. This came up. So nightmares, my good sir. For the rare person that has no idea of what a nightmare is or never experienced a nightmare, and if you are that person that's listening to this, you are very, very freaking lucky.
Amen.
JJ, why don't you quickly defining a nightmare?
Sure. They are, in short, bad dreams. Dreams that you would not willingly wish to have in your waking moments. And I think Pete Holmes probably said it best when he was like, okay, you open a box and you see what's in the box and it scares you. And you go, you know what? My brain is a dick because I made that box. I made what is in that box, and yet it's just wanting to scare me. And I've never heard it put any better way.
That's a good way of putting it, too. I never really thought about your brain opening a taboo box of shit that'll scare you.
Well, there are a couple of different theories as to what dreams are. I have always considered them to be primarily vehicles for memory dumps. And I have no scientific basis for this, so do not take me literally or as the ultimate authority on this matter because I am not a scientist in the sleep studies. But you have to have sleep, and that is primarily a function to reset your brain because our brain consumes so much energy. Otherwise, you go clinically insane and you will expire because of it. And it makes total sense that things that are in your short term, well, I don't know if it's short term or long term or a combination thereof, but items that you have not thought about, things that you don't need anymore, they get jumbled up and eventually flushed from the system. And I mean, it makes a good bit of sense because of the fact that, what's the best way of saying this? That would explain the highly random nature of what dreams are. They're not going to be the same. They're always going to be different. And that's because whatever topics are at hand or needs to be wiped or whatever it may be are constantly going into this queue, getting yanked out, and then that becomes your subject matter for that night. I'm a little bit different in that although I do have some normal dreams, they are by and far in the minority. I don't know if it's a result of bad DNA, if it's a result of a generational curse, but my family is rather renowned for having horrible dreams. My Uncle Ernest had them. My mom still has them, although hers are more mundane in nature. And by mundane, I mean that they are things that could theoretically happen in reality. Someone breaking into the house, someone trying to hurt her or her family, things along that nature. Me, ever since I was 5 or 6 years old, I have dreamed of monsters. And later in life, that evolved into dreaming of demons. And I actually covered a lot of this in my season 5, episode 2 of The Pains of Dreaming Demonic.
When you said that you mainly dreamt of monsters, and this started relatively young. As we've talked back and forth over the past few months and gotten to know each other more, I know that you were into Dungeons and Dragons, you were always into monsters. Do you think that may be a catalyst that kind of started it all based off of your interests and what you like?
It could be. I'm not denying that's a distinct possibility. From a very young age, I have always been interested in ghost stories and monsters. The Whenever I would watch 80s and 90s cartoons, I rooted for the villains because they were just undeniably cooler. Skeletor, Cobra Commander, all the rest of them. Just, in fact, my mom, whenever it was time for a Christmas or a birthday or something like that, and family members would ask her, what should I get JJ? And she'd always say, find him the ugliest toy you can, and he will love it. And that is almost undoubtedly true.
When I think about nightmares, thankfully I don't get them frequently. So I watch a lot of horror like
Oh,
you.
I do too. Almost exclusively horror or anime at this point.
I watch a lot of horror TV shows, stuff with ghost hunting and stuff like that. I like to read about different paranormal creatures, cryptids, whatever. Anything that'll give you a nice scare. And I don't find myself dreaming about them, if that makes sense. I don't know why. I was never one to have frequent nightmares. Maybe around this time last year, I had a nightmare, night terror, however you want to label it. And it was with the nun character from the Conjuring series.
Hmm.
And in that nightmare, I was dreaming that I was in my room, laying in my bed, and four hooded monk figures were holding me down. And the nun was just screaming in my face. I don't recall if I was saying Jesus help me or God help me, something of that sort in my head in that dream. And I screamed in the dream, but I actually screamed in real life, and it woke my wife up, and she was like, "Hey, are you okay? What's going on?" type of thing. And it just felt so real. I don't have those frequently, thankfully. That was probably one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced when it comes to a nightmare or a dream. And one thing that I tend to do sometimes, it would kind of be like a nightmare, but it would kind of be, I don't want to say precognition, in the sense that I will dream of some sort of event happening, and then I will get deja vu maybe a month later, a year or two later, and I will instantly remember that dream and the horrible things that happened in that dream. I'll remember that, and I would do the complete opposite of what I did, if that makes sense.
It does. In fact, when I was young, I would have those types of precognition dreams. And they were always radically different than every other dream I have. Like all of my other dreams are in vivid color. And these were always in black and white without fail. A month, 6 months later, the event would happen, and then I would be struck by that horrible sense of deja vu. And sometimes the events were just mundane, and other times they were painful for me, not for anybody else, thank God. I remember one time I dreamed that this is going to sound a little bit bizarre. When I was born, so I have black hair and blue eyes. But when I was born, I was blonde headed. In my dreams, every once in a while when I was young, I would dream of myself as an idealized self. Like I was always a chubby kid. And this kid in my dreams had blonde hair, was handsome, and skinny. I don't know why. but that would be the figure that would undergo these things in my dreams. And one time I dreamed that I had fallen into a cactus pot. And then, sure enough, I don't know how long after that fact, I fell into, like, my aunt had this giant, it's essentially a giant tire rim that was empty of anything but the outside metal. And on the inside, she had a huge cactus. And I was running around it, having fun, cutting around with somebody, and then fell over into it and was just covered in needles. And then it struck me that, oh, wait, I actually dreamed of it.
Now, this is probably an odd question. Did you ever feel guilty that you dreamt of that and then it happened and you're like, fuck, why didn't I do
No,
that?
because it never happened before the event happened. It always happened after the event occurred. And then I would be struck by the horrible sense of deja vu. So it was never something in which I saw a clear path ahead of me and I was able to choose one over the other. Mine was, you're only going to recognize the fact until the event itself has already happened.
Why don't you go into some of, I don't want to say creepy. This is probably the wrong way to label it, but maybe some of your more memorable or traumatic nightmares that you've had throughout your life.
Sure.
And maybe after that, you could probably go into discussing what the significance of it might be, or may not have no significance at all.
Let me ask you this before I do. Have you
Sure.
ever died in your dreams?
No. Anytime I'm about to die in my dream, I will wake up instantly before something like that happens.
Yeah, I'm not that lucky.
Really?
I have died 3 times in my dreams. The first time, I never have flying dreams, but this one time when I was a kid, I did. And then I fell out of the sky. I didn't wake up when I hit the ground. And I felt, although there was no pain, there's never pain in a dream. I hit the ground. I felt and knew that all of my bones have been shattered. And then I woke up after that. That was the first time. Second time is I dreamed I was in essentially a video game. It was a post apocalyptic wasteland. I had to be like 11 or 12 when this happened. And I was in futuristic arm.
Fallout before it became Fallout.
It's something like that, although it's much more hellish in nature. So it's almost like a Doom type of thing, but with a lot of ruined buildings in the background. And I was with a team. We were all in futuristic armor and had like plasma weapons and stuff. And we were skirting through, hunting down something. And one of the monsters rose up from behind a wall and shot me with the plasma beam. And I saw myself dissolve. And I knew I was dead. I knew I was about to just go pop. And I knew there should be pain, and yet there wasn't. And I woke up. The third time, and unfortunately the last, was I dreamed I was trapped in an old dilapidated house. And there were hordes upon hordes of zombies trying to get in. It was me and a group of survivors that were trying to make it, and we knew everything was falling apart around us. The zombies themselves were weird looking. They were mottled black and white and with red eyes. It was almost like highly artistic in their drawing for some reason. And they broke through the front door, and I was the first one there trying to protect the others. And they, like, a bunch of them flopped on top of me and began ripping me to pieces. And I woke up.
See, that's curious to me because when you hear about people, potentially dying in dreams, most people they wake up right before. And it's mainly, well, I don't want to say mainly. People speculate because again, I'm not an expert on this. I'm not a psychologist of any sort. People speculate that our fear of death and our body not knowing how to react to it like jolts us awake before that happens. But your case is unique in which you actually died. Did it feel any type of way in the
N-
dream?
No, the only thing that my mind would always note is there should be a whole lot of pain, and there is not. So it was just, that's why I said in dreams you don't feel pain. So I never felt anything in particular. So it was interesting in that regard. And that I think it was the reality of that absence of pain that normally would, that's what jolted me awake. Because I am not a lucid dreamer by any stretch of the word. I think I maybe once I have realized I was in a dream, but then woke up immediately after. I don't know, but I know that it's not something that I've ever been able to do, and I wish that I could.
Yeah, I'm not much of a lucid dreamer either. Nor would I want to be. That's something I would want to avoid because I've seen TikToks of people telling stories of they're in a dream and they're lucid dreaming and they ask the people, "Hey, what time is it?" or something of that sort.
Yeah,
That's
and
what
I
wakes them
am
up.
fascinated by those, like absolutely fascinated. I've brought it up on Southern Demonology once or twice because I'm just always curious to see if anyone that may be listening to this podcast or to my podcast, if they've experienced anything similar. Because it's just, if that truly is a phenomenon and not just people BSing to get likes and internet and imaginary internet points, then I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. It seems that when people do that, the folks in the dream tend to get very angry.
Yeah, and they will either begin chasing them or they will eject them from the dream. In fact, I ran across another exact kind of situation like what you're describing last night when I was browsing through TikTok, and I sent it over to you because I'm like, hey, yet another one of these. One last diversion. Let me ask you this. Does your dreams tend to take place in a type of setting?
Not necessarily. They tend to shift randomly depending on what's going on. Like one second I'll be at someone else's house, the next second I'll be in like fucking France. It makes no sense whatsoever.
A vast majority of my dreams, they will take place in a hotel, a school, or a mall. And malls are the most rare, but usually it's a hotel or a dorm room or a school, and they can be all the same thing all at once. But the main thing that defines them is that they are huge. They are labyrinthine. They are mazes. And although my dream self knows exactly where to go, if I had to trace my way through, and I have an unerring sense of direction, always have. If I've been there once, I can always find my way back. No, I could never do it again. In fact, the interesting part is that I had a listener submission that's actually going to be coming out in season 5, episode 5, who experienced a lot of the same phenomena that I have from an absolutely horrid dream about hell and even the types of locales. And she's like, I've been out of school for 25 years and I've been the same. And yet I will still dream of schools, but yet they are huge and Byzantine and labyrinthine. I don't know. I don't know what that says.
JJ, I don't think I ever shared this on an episode, but I know I told you about this personally. It was such a weird, I'm going to call it a nightmare.
Dude, that's our secret. Don't go and saying all that. No.
Sorry, guys, you're not in the fan club, so I can't disclose it. I'm sorry. All right,
No,
JJ.
go
I'm
ahead.
kidding.
Go ahead, please.
So you might recall me telling you this maybe about 3 months back or so. It started, I woke up at probably around 2:30 a.m. because both my dogs needed to go to the bathroom. They come back in. I'm like, you know what? I don't feel like walking back upstairs. So I'm going to go lay on the couch. I pop on an audiobook, which happened to be the Bible. I'm one of those weird people that I listen to audiobooks, things ranging from the commentaries of Julius Caesar to Lord of the Rings to religious texts and whatnot. So the reason I say that is because I don't know if it played any significance of what happened in the dream.
I remember the story. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fucking creepy. My golden retriever, he stays downstairs with me. He's laying by the couch. My other dog goes back upstairs. So I lay down, I pop the book on. It's not in my headphones, so I don't have anything plugged in. It's just playing out loud. I think it was going through like this section of the Psalms. So I fall asleep, and for some reason, I dream that I'm laying on that same couch. I wake up. I'm still on that couch. Same blanket and everything, same clothing that I have back on. But something feels off. My wife is at the top of the stairs calling for me. And she's like, Chris, you need to come upstairs, yada, yada, yada. And I come upstairs. And in this room right here that we're recording in right now, there is someone tied to the bed. And there are other people around dressed in robes. And my wife is apologizing. She's like, we thought it would be a joke to do like a seance or something like that. And standing over the person tied to the bed is some sort of minotaur looking type of creature. And I'm like, what the fuck? So in the dream, if you recall, JJ, I told you I got really angry and I just started wailing on this fucking thing, like just punching the shit out of it. Like I kicked it down the stairs, like get the fuck out of my house, yada, yada, yada. And then after like I kicked it out the house, like I woke up. I woke up in a cold sweat. I'm like, what the fuck? What is this? So later that morning, my wife left to work and I sent her a voice message. I forgot to tell you about this dream before I left. And it was the weirdest fucking thing. I kind of gave the Cliff Notes version and it was kind of cleaner, but that was kind of the gist of it. And I don't know how to explain that because in this dream, when I was punching whatever it was, it felt like I was hitting something. Normally in dreams, when you're punching things, it feels like you're punching a pillow. And I've had dreams like that where I like sock someone right in the face and it feels like I punched a pillow.
You're just violent. When you told me that, I was struck by that dream. I mean, the fact that I remember us discussing that the fact that you were listening to the Bible probably allowed you to beat the crap out of whatever that thing was. It was most certainly an interesting one. And those are some of the types of dreams that I've had to the point where I know things that I should not know, feeling pain when there should absolutely be no pain. Even though I've died in my dreams, never felt pain before, some of my dreams go well beyond what should be physically possible, and they scare me.
Why don't we take this as the perfect opportunity to dive into a few of those?
Well, let's talk about 5 other unrelated things first, and then we can do. No, I'm joking.
Why don't we segue into some more of your creepy ass nightmares that you've lived with throughout your life?
Well, the one that still takes the cake is absolutely the Tokyo dream, which I know that we had discussed before. So just as a brief refresher, I'm up working all night, fall asleep, I don't know, around 5 a.m. Got my phone right next to my head, and I dream that there's an entity outside on the balcony physically banging on the glass to get in. And it's shouting a word, Haidu, into my head over and over again. And I wake up to my earthquake alarm going off because we experienced a minor earthquake at the time. I was there starting in right in October of 2011, and at this time there were still a lot of aftershocks that were taking place in Tokyo from the 311 tsunami an earthquake that hit Fukushima Daiichi. And I couldn't hear it, but that word was just like psychically implanted into my brain as a huge scream. Hurt my head, felt pain, woke up, ran to my Japanese English dictionary because I didn't recognize the word, and it means to enter. This thing was demanding entry. So it was not a dream. This thing, I lived right outside of a huge graveyard in the middle of Tokyo. Always kind of creeped me out, and I never walked near that graveyard again. That is absolutely top billing by and far. But then I've had 3 dreams in college that I classify as demonic. And the third I don't remember anymore, thank God. But the other 2 I absolutely do.
Before you go into those, JJ,
Sure.
you classify them as demonic because you actually saw demons, or was it because of the atmosphere before you go into them?
Both.
Both? Okay.
So in the first one, this wizened man came up to me, but he was extremely strong. He was I thought was just old until I got a look at him, and he was decomposing as we spoke. But he was shirtless, but he was dressed in a tattered robe. And he he just laid a hand on me, and we were then flying up into the sky. And it wasn't a pleasant experience because he was showing me a hellscape. Nothing but ruin and destruction below us. And he was saying, you caused this. You are your actions resulted in hell on earth. And we eventually landed on a hillside, and we were looking down at the entire landscape. And he had his arm around me, but it wasn't in a friendly gesture. I felt nothing but threat and evil radiating off from this thing. And I woke up. That was the first. The second, I dreamed I was trapped on the top of a skyscraper that was flat on the top. And there were tons of structures up there, and they were huge, and they were non-Euclidean. They were not just ordinary rectangles and squares, but they were composed of impossible angles. And they were all a flat gray color. There were no stars in the sky. It was just a matte black, the sky. And I was being chased. And I hid behind a wall, and it did not help because the thing found me in pretty short order. And it was a huge, I don't know, 9 or 10 foot tall anthropomorphic crow. And it held in its winged hand a giant pair of scissors, but they were the size of great swords. One end was chopped in half and shaped more like a machete. Both edges were rusted and pitted with age and gore. And this thing just kept shaking them in my direction. And before it cut me, I remember just gazing up into its face as it towered over me, and its eyes. I've never seen anything like it since. They were a sparkly, iridescent gray, light gray color, but you could almost see uh, like purple swirls of madness on the inside of them. This thing was a demon, and it terrified me. And before it decapitated me, I woke up. So that was college. And I will say that these happened either shortly before or after. And I think it was after I was assigned to read the one book that, I mean, looking back, you can say it fundamentally changed my life, which was Hostage to the Devil by Malachi Martin.
I've said it before on the show. Such a good book.
For me, I had nightmares even worse nightmares than normal for 6 months afterwards. And these were two of them. So be aware, because the book is potent. It helps to teach you not just about the realities, but also the theologies behind the kingdom and the infernal. And it's highly worthwhile to read, but just steel yourself. I'll put it that way.
Right. Yeah, that is a fair warning to give people. Since you said that these dreams came about because you were reading that book, do you think it was your fear manifesting itself based off of those stories in your subconscious and then affecting your dreams? I know it's probably a while ago for you to try to vividly remember, but do you think or do you recall these stories just being, constantly on your mind to the fact that, it just like, fuck it, all my nightmares are probably going to be related to this? Or have you had
So
further other dreams similar to that were not potentially influenced by some sort of text or media that you consumed?
when you said that you dreamed of that character from The Nun, that is completely foreign to me. Because even though I love horror movies, I love cryptids, I love yokai, but I've never dreamed of a fictional or movie character in my dreams. Jason Voorhees have never shown up. Freddy's never shown up. Pumpkinhead's never shown up. These are always highly unique and original things. And like, at least on the surface, there's nothing that would point to a piece of like a movie or a piece of fiction or nonfiction that I've read that would immediately say, oh, yeah, this is the thing that I saw in my dream. So, yeah, I mean, I can't deny the possibility of it. This was 26 years ago, essentially. I can't deny that the stuff was on my brain a lot because I was constantly thinking about that book. So it very well could have been the source of a lot of this, but nothing that would have come straight from its pages. My brain is never that literal, I guess you could say.
No, that makes complete sense, because for me, it has to be some sort of media or something that I consume that I don't want to say irrationally afraid of, but something of that sort. It strikes a fear in me, like an innate fear. I don't know why. But that particular character, like the nun character, just gives me the heebie jeebies. And it's always like whenever I watch The Conjuring or something like that, it's always in my mind's eye. Like it'll stay there for a while. And
Oh, I
it's
can understand that. Although, if you ever happen to watch the actual like dedicated nun movie, it was so absolutely horrible, then I think it would turn that into more of a joke than it would be a scary thing.
No, I've watched them all. I've watched them all. I'd say it's more scary in The Conjuring 2 as opposed to the other two films. With the examples that you gave with those two dreams that you consider demonic and infernal, I don't want to say that, we can automatically attribute it to Hostage to the Devil, you reading that book. But what I did want to ask is, did you have similar dreams recently or in the past that were of a similar nature, but you didn't do anything to potentially trigger yourself dreaming about that? Like,
Oh
you could be
yeah.
watching fucking Gundam Wing all day, and then it's like you go to bed and it's like, what the fuck did I just dream about?
That happened actually during Lent. I never dream of demons normally. I dream of monsters all the time. Yes. I dream of ghosts, dream of zombies a great deal, but I don't dream of demons. And the first night I dreamed that I was in a fiery landscape. It was a red, it could have been Mars at night for all I know. Pitch black, only fires that were burning off in the background illuminated anything. But my eyes were drawn to this small mound of dead and skinless bodies piled up. On top of it was seated a woman. She was dressed in like all solid black leather, and she had black hair, short like a pixie cut. And she would have been beautiful if it was in any other context. You could just look into her eyes, which just radiated this inner, like living eternal fire. And it wasn't a good thing. And she looked at me with a sneer on her mouth, and she reached down and she casually pulled the flesh from my bones, starting with my face. And remember when I said that just pain doesn't happen in dreams? Oh, it happened. Not nearly to the extent that such an actual event happening for real, but I felt pain when that skin detached from my head. And at that moment, my vision switched from being from inside of my head to a third person observer, and I could see my bloody skull being revealed as the straps of skin slowly stretched and tore away from my flesh. And then I woke up, and I woke up in a sweat, pain still radiating in my head, but I was finally able to calm down, and I somehow fell back asleep, and I was right back with her. And this happened another 3 or 4 times until morning finally rolled around, and I got up at an ungodly early hour because I just couldn't take it anymore. That was night 1. Night 2. And I wish to God I was making this shit up. It would make me feel so much better. So when I was 5 years old, and I make a living, not a living, but I mean, a significant portion of my life is spent talking about this shit, and yet I still feel my throat closing when I have to talk about this. When I was 5, I dreamt that I had a Bert doll from Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street. And I loved it. I carried it around, and you know that kind of sickly yellow that Bert is. Well, I noticed that in carrying it around, it was getting on my hands, that same yellow, and it was spreading all over me. And then it began to spread to my family. Like I ran to my mom and my grandmother, and they touched me, and then they got it. And then the whole world began to be consumed by this sickly pestilence yellow. And I woke up. Well, on the second night of these dreams, I envisioned a much more beautiful sight, at least at first blush. It was like a sparkling, iridescent green, and it was full of like glitter or just sparkling notes all in the background. And there was a beautiful young lady with blonde hair. I saw her from a profile, and it was almost like an anime heroine, like just beautiful. But then the inner part of the background surrounding her was filled with that same yellow, and it began to take over. And then this was a very quick dream, but then it was like I went again to third person view, like it wanted to show me this is what's happening to you. And it was almost like I was watching a live MRI of the inside of my skull. And in my brain, little yellow pustules began to form until they just rapidly multiplied. And suddenly my entire brain cavity was filled with this yellow pus, and pain lanced through my head. And I woke up. For the second time, I felt pain. The third night, nothing happened. And I began to breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. I'm like, oh, thank God. There's not 3 like there was in college. Maybe I'm safe. But I have been so tired from the last 2 nights of just horrible dreams and pain and sleeplessness that I'm like, okay, I gotta take a nap. I have to take a nap. So I did. And I dreamed. And it was the worst of the 3. And by and far the most elaborate. I dreamed I was a priest in a church. I have never seen a church like this before. It was old. The floor was tiled. The front doors, they were double doors. Old mahogany, looked like, mahogany or cherry or oak, but dark brown color, beautiful. Sturdy as hell, thick. And there were a couple of other priests hanging around, and maybe 20 or 30 parishioners hanging around. And then over to my right hand side, there's a wall that's pretty long, and it was nothing but glass. And it's beautiful. And it overlooked a balcony. The church was situated on a hill. And so the balcony actually had a series of switchback stairs that were rather large in nature. And then they would descend down to the base of the hill. And the whole place was just filled with peace and love until the doors pounded from the outside and dust shook. And then people began to scream as this thing busted through these thick barred doors. It was a giant black dragon, massive in size. It could barely fit through these gigantic doorways. But instead of a singular head, there were hundreds of looked like worms. Black, shiny, segmented, with hungry maws at the end of each one of them. And it also had like these tentacles on their backs, whether it was a worm head or it was one of these tentacles, or just taking its front claws and slashing, it began to grab, devour, and kill any of the parishioners that were closest to the door that I could reach the quickest. And it was fast. And one of the other priests who were quick thinking screamed, "Get out on the balcony, get out." And so people began to storm toward the balcony. And I was ushering people through, trying to get them out. And then I think I was the last person to leave through the glass doors. The beast had another trick up its sleeve. It had a tail, and this tail essentially went on for miles, but it had wrapped around those switchback stairs. So it was almost like a pincer attack where it walked through the front door and then its tail was taking the side. And the tail, there wasn't a singular head on it. They were rather, it was almost like buds popping off from the sides of this thing, and almost like plant like in nature. And they had huge teeth. And I remember like trying to dodge these heads that were attached to the tail. I mean, directly attached. There wasn't like a tentacle or anything. They were just, there was a tail and then a head would be attached, and maybe like, 5 every foot or so. So there's a lot of them. And one of them grazed my ankle as I was running down, and was able to take a strip of flesh off. And my ankle burned like hell. But I was finally able to make it down the stairs to where people were cowering in fear at the base of the hill. And I remember running to like the main priest that was down there. And it was like a bishop or a cardinal, I forget what exactly. But I knew that this thing had come after him. And he was the most important person there. And it was almost like I had almost traveled from the future and knew this was what's going to happen. And I told him, Father, you have to leave. If you die here, then all hope is lost. The world is doomed. And he gave me the sad, beatific smile and said, It's okay. It's my job to fight. And he walked off. Before I woke up, I heard the sounds of him being ripped apart. And that was dream number 3.
Those were really heavy. Heavy dreams, my friend.
They still haunt me. Like, I wish to God I was making this shit up. But
Do you think there's any significance to them? Do you think there was something?
Well, the fact that I felt pain in
Mhm.
these dreams, in all 3 of the dreams, and that pain escalated. The first one was like a mild ache. The second one was a dull throb, until the third one was a sharp pain in my leg. They scared me. They continue to scare me. I don't know. A few weeks later, I was scheduled to make an appearance on Nickelodeon TV. And I've been on their program 3 times. Yeah, that was actually 4 maybe now. But anyway, I went on their program. Yeah, I went on the 4th. I was actually their season closer for season 3. I went on that program, and before we started, and I think that we were slated to talk about Japanese yokai during that particular session, I asked the bishop about this. And he brought up something that I had not considered that I find an intriguing possibility. Remember when I said that this all happened during Lent? He said that just like with, Halloween, Lent is another time in which this world and the next are closer together and the barriers are weaker. And it could be that things are bleeding through and coming after you. And he was actually nice enough to send me a kit of protection, which is actually this nice wooden box with exercised holy water, exercised holy oil, and a crucifix. And so I used them. And I have not had those dreams since then. Have I had nightmares? Yes. Have I had bad nightmares? Not nearly to that extent, nor involving that particular subject matter.
So during that time of Lent, I know like during Lent, we're technically supposed to give something up. Were you actively participating?
No.
The one thing that I wonder is one, why would something come after you? The only thing I could think of, this might be your answer, and I don't mean to steal your thunder if that's the case, is your podcast and what you discuss
Yeah.
and what you studied, professionally in academia.
That is my answer. I have been targeted quite a few times before. In fact, the episode I have that's about to come out is a lot of it is about how the podcast has been both a boon and a curse to my life, because I met amazing people. I've met you, for example. We have become amazing friends. I thank God for that every day. But then I have also had mystery illnesses. I've had injuries that have no explanation to them. I have been the object of demonic obsession and oppression. And I can't think of another reason why that would be the case than to say, and I've had conversations with Father Birdsong about this, that the enemy does not like you talking about them. It does not like you educating about their motives, their methods of action, their modus operandi, or how to help protect against them. And they will do anything to get rid of that.
No, I completely agree with you. And when you say you've experienced demonic obsession and oppression, I know this podcast is supposed to be strictly on dreams and nightmares, but I can't help myself. Are you referring to those dreams that you just talked about, or were there other things that occurred while you were awake that made you think, there might be something else going on here?
Oh, there are other things. I won't go into huge amounts of detail here, but this is something I brought up in a early episode. Well, about maybe a quarter of the way through Southern Demonology's catalog. And it's a little embarrassing to talk about. But when I was a young kid, I was laying on the couch, I was watching TV, and something in my head told me, you should bet your soul over something. And they're always inconsequential. Can you make this, can you throw this piece of trash into the trash can and make it? If not, you lose. They're never like, oh, you're going to get rich, or oh, you're going to get your most favored thing in the world. It's always, hey, there's never a benefit to me. It's only a negative every single time.
No Hawk Tua there, right?
Yeah, exactly. No Hawk Tua, unfortunately. Oh my God. I actually tried to explain that to my wife one night, and she did not get it whatsoever. And even after explaining it over and over again, she still didn't quite get it. And I'm like, that's okay. Don't worry about it. It took all the fun out of it. Anyway, but and I wrestled with that in my head, and I lost that night, and I was devastated, and I was crying, and I just knew that I had sent my soul to hell. And my mom came in from work. She was the only one who worked, because my grandmother had a horrifically rare disease that would manifest calcium deposits in the tips of her fingers. It was a rare type of scleroderma. And if you touch them, it was almost like taking a hammer and just beating the end of your finger. It was awful. So she couldn't work. So she was retired. So she just stayed home and took care of me. And then my mom would go work at the phone company, and she worked a lot. Well, she came home from working, and I was just inconsolable. And she finally calmed me down and said, "No, that's not real. That didn't really happen. Don't worry about it." But for years, I carried that voice in the back of my head. And I'm talking about like a decade, if not 15 years. It would always haunt me until I was finally able to put it to rest. And then after doing that episode, whether that was a triggering moment to however screwed up my brain happens to be, or this really was the demonic coming back into my life and using that as another way to get to me, it's back. And I have to actively squash it down, and I can, but it's a constant source of distraction, and I hate it beyond all belief.
As we're talking throughout this entire show and you're sharing your stories. And one thing that I noticed is that a lot of things seem to have a start from when you were young and a time in your life where, you're just an innocent kid and you probably don't really have an understanding of what's going on, what any of this shit means, anything of that sort. And it makes me wonder, like, when I was a kid, I saw certain things, like these little Hispanic cultures, like Latino cultures, call them duendes. They're like these little people, goblin type of things. And that was to the extent of it. It wasn't until I was like much older, maybe I would want to say much older, maybe 10 years old or so, when we moved into that house that was haunted. But for you, JJ, what do you think is going on here?
I think a lot of that actually came from remember, I grew up, even though I'm Catholic now, I grew up Southern Baptist. And actually, I give a lot of credit to my mom because my mom is non denominational. My grandmother is non denominational. They are not church going people. And when I wanted to go to a church, mainly to go see the little girlfriend I had at the time, so it wasn't the most like altruistic of motives, but um, she told me that you can be whatever religion you want to be. I don't care. Just believe in God and you'll be good to go. And so I would often go to this Southern Baptist church that was a mile and a half from where I lived. And they were very, very fond of hellfire and brimstone speeches. And so I would get the hate that would come from those, but not understand besides the devil is bad and he's trying to get you. And that's the only explanation I've got.
No, I think that's a fair assessment. That type of exposure early on would, lay the groundwork for certain things that people will experience. If not always remaining in your mind, it'll still affect you subconsciously.
True, but I also grew up on ghost stories. And I loved ghost stories. I buried my own grave marker when I was 5 years old. I spent a lot of summers in graveyards by maintaining them and mowing them with my grandmother and my great aunts and my great uncle. Because the churches normally wouldn't pay someone to do it, and so they would volunteer. So I was close to death a lot of my life. And that combined with my love for ghost stories, in addition to the hellfire and brimstone, might explain them.
I'm gonna go the creepy route and say there's something more creepy afloat.
Well, the funny thing is that If I had sat down and planned out my life and what I was going to study, it makes total sense for what I wound up studying academically. Second Temple Judaism, the pseudepigrapha, the Dead Sea Scrolls, angelology and demonology. They are right up my alley. But yet, I found that by complete coincidence. Funny enough, it was, and I originally went to college to study philosophy and physics. And then I realized that my math skills were not, they were fine. I was able to get through Calc 2 without a problem, but I didn't have a particular talent for it. And I knew that. And I knew that if I was not exceptional at something, then why would I pursue any type of degree or, worse yet, career in that? And so I dropped that and went to the other thing that I found interesting, which was religion. And our religion department had 3 different tracks to study. There was world religions, there was biblical studies, and then there was theology. And I was first attracted to world religions because I came from a town of 113 people. I knew nothing about the world and I wanted to know more. And so I did that and I loved it. And then I was starting to take classes in theology, and I loved that because it dovetails so perfectly with philosophy. But then I was on the second floor of our old Victorian building that housed our religion department, and I saw a sign up sheet to study biblical Hebrew. And I'm like, oh gosh, that sounds awesome. And so I put my name on it. I was one of a handful of people that did. And that's how I got sucked into Hebrew and the Dead Sea Scrolls and Second Temple Judaism. And then started studying Ethiopic and got into the pseudepigrapha. And it just kind of all naturally dovetailed from there. So it's weird that my feet keep finding these things almost seemingly of their own accord.
I got one more question for you, JJ.
No.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
We'll end it here, folks. What I wanted to ask is, okay, you said you were, exposed to death very early on.
I came from a huge family. And so we're from a small, rural, southern town. We do not eat the most healthy of foods, and we were poor. So we had a lot of deaths in our family. And so, yeah, I remember going to our family funeral home more times than I can count and stick at.
Right. And what I was getting at with that question is, this may seem a little out there, but, it's a paranormal podcast. And
I'm used to you. Don't worry about it.
Fair. But, we talk about weird shit here, talking about demons and all that shit. Do you think that, your veil between the living and the dead was kind of, I don't want to say lifted. That's not the word I'm looking for, but kind of thinned a little bit?
It was when I was young, I would say. I was much more like, for example, the dreams with the deja vu and the almost clairvoyance. Those only happened when I was a kid. They don't happen anymore. So I would say I was closer then than I've ever been for any other point in time of my life. But the fact that something is reaching out through, even though that barrier is as thick as humanly possible, because I carry, 25 active filters between me and the world at any given moment in time. And that's why I hate getting drunk, because all those filters just fall away. And suddenly you get me unvarnished. And that's a scary thing for anybody. Dear Lord.
All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna have
we're
a drug
not.
seance, and we're gonna see what comes through the veil to talk to JJ.
Yeah, because I love Ouija boards, boy.
Oh, absolutely. Look, you got one hanging right behind you, too. Like, what the hell?
Oh, that's Clyde. Clyde's a good guy.
But what I was trying to get at, JJ, is like I'm trying to wrap my head around of like taking away Hostage to the Devil book influencing any of those dreams. All of your other dreams and the things that you experience throughout your life with demonic obsession and oppression, I keep trying to think back like, what the hell could possibly be drawing them to you, because you didn't start Southern Demonology until like what, 2017.
Yep.
So between that time of you being born in the 70s till then, what is drawing to you to have you experience all this ridiculous shit?
I wish to God I knew. Honestly, I have no definite proof of this, but our family has handed down all of these stories about our ancestors and how they encountered evil and protected themselves from that with God's grace. I had a great, 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 great aunt somewhere. She protected herself from an attack in a graveyard by reciting the Lord's Prayer. My grandmother, she protected herself from the chains of the devil by reciting the Lord's Prayer. I don't know if it's a result of a generational curse, and maybe the horrible, horrible nightmares are a side effect from that, but there is definitely something hanging over my family line on my mom's side because I don't know anyone on my dad's side. And the area that we come from, I mean, it is, I call it a patchwork of nightmares. Every little piece of property has its own ghost stories, its own dangers. I love it. I love where my mom is. I love where I grew up. I even love the creepy haunted house that I grew up in. That was a log cabin that's 200 years old that is now gone away. But even though in the house I dreamt of a picture of my great grandfather like gazing down at me with crazy eyes while the stair step door to the attic opened up and something was in there waiting for me. And a voice boomed out that you will die on November 2nd. Didn't tell me a year, but that dream scared the ever living bejesus out of me. And it still kind of does. And I never think about that dream until after November 2nd has come and gone. And I'm like,
You're
well,
not allowed to for at least another 60 years, dude.
it's not this year, I guess. I'll go about my day.
Not allowed.
I would like to stick with my wife, but yeah, I'm prepared for. I'm never actively seeking to leave this life, but good Lord takes me. The good Lord takes me. That's all I know.
Whenever that happens, don't you ever appear to me, because I will die.
Oh, I will. I'll come. Ooh, Bill Felgore is here.
JJ, once again, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your stories and your thoughts and opinions. I know some of our listeners that I know personally greatly appreciate when you come on the show.
It is my absolute pleasure. And I just got through doing the sign of the cross with some holy water that Father Birdsong was nice enough to send to me. It's me. These are never pleasant conversations, but they are worthwhile. And if they help one person out there, then it will all be worth the uncomfortableness of recounting all of this. I'll put it that way.
No, I completely agree. Whether you help one person or a million people, you still help someone. That's the way I view it, to be honest with you. So, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah. So Southern Demonology is a podcast that has been in operation since 2017, growing in popularity year after year, which surprises the ever-living heck out of me because of, well, it's me and it's my voice. So the fact that people keep coming to it is nothing short of a miracle. But regardless, we are on every major podcasting platform, and you can find us at southerndemonology.com or on whatever platform you happen to choose. In addition to YouTube, we're also on Spotify, Facebook, most other social media sites, except for Twitter. And yes, it's Twitter. It will never be the other stupid name. Links to all of our socials, in addition to how to contact me, is on southerndemonology.com.
And for JJ's listeners, since this is going to be a joint publication, you can find The Wandering Road on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, all major podcast platforms. If you want to reach us to be a guest on the show, or you want to share any of your stories via email, or suggest any topics or share your opinions, you could reach us at our email address of twroadpodcast@gmail.com. You can search us on Facebook at The Wandering Road Podcast. We are on Instagram. We are on TikTok. And unfortunately, JJ, I am on Twitter as well.
Well, that's you, not me.
And folks, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, good night, and good weekend. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a rating on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share the show with your friends, as that would help us grow immensely. Also be sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on TikTok at twrpodcast, our Instagram at twroadpodcast, and our Facebook by searching for The Wandering Road Podcast. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can reach us at our email address, twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We would love to have you on the show as a guest so you can share your stories, or you could submit email submissions of your stories that we could dedicate an episode to. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next one.